Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Breon Peace, the United States Attorney for the Eastern District of New York. Today, we are announcing 3 impactful cases from my office in our nation's fight against the People's Republic of China's transnational repression activities. The first 2 criminal complaints that I am announcing shed further light on the extent of the PRC government's efforts to project its authoritarian worldview on the residents of this city and this country. The 2 complaints charge more than 30 officers with China's national police force, which is called the Ministry of Public Security, or the MPS, and 2 New York City residents with violations of U.S. law. Unlike typical officers, the MPS officers who have been charged today are not focused on preventing crime. Rather, the complaints charge these MPS officers with engaging in transnational repression schemes targeting members of the Chinese diaspora community in New York City and elsewhere in the United States. And as shown in these complaints, the MPS has repeatedly and flagrantly violated our nation's sovereignty, including by opening and operating a police station in the middle of New York City. The third case will be announced by Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General David Newman of the Department's National Security Division. Let me introduce the other speakers you'll hear from today. I'm joined by Michael Driscoll, Assistant Director in charge of the FBI's New York Field Office, and David Sundberg, Assistant Director in charge of the FBI's Washington Field Office, and of course, my Assistant U.S. Attorney team. 2 miles from our office, just across the Brooklyn Bridge, this nondescript office building in the heart of bustling Chinatown in Lower Manhattan has a dark secret. Until several months ago, an entire floor of this building hosted an undeclared police station of the Chinese National Police. Now just imagine the NYPD opening an undeclared secret police station in Beijing. It would be unthinkable. Here's what we know happened inside the secret police station in Lower Manhattan. At the very least, the station was providing some government services, like helping Chinese citizens renew their Chinese driver's licenses. But to do even that, the law requires that individuals like the defendants who act as agents of a foreign government give prior notice to the Attorney General before setting up shop in New York City. That didn't happen. More troubling, though, is the fact that the secret police station appears to have had a more sinister use. On at least one occasion, an official with the Chinese National Police directed one of the defendants, a U.S. citizen who worked at the secret police station, to help locate a pro-democracy activist of Chinese descent living in California. In other words, the Chinese National Police appear to have been using the station to track a U.S. resident on U.S. soil. The 2 defendants whose arrests we're announcing today destroyed evidence of their communications with the Chinese National Police when they learned of the FBI's investigation. These 2 defendants knew they had something to hide, and they obstructed justice in an attempt to prevent the FBI from learning the full extent of what they were up to. Before I go through the evidence in more detail, I'd like to say how proud I am of our office and the New York Field Office of the FBI, as we are the first law enforcement partners in the world to make arrests in connection with the Chinese government's overseas police stations. Now, the defendants, Liu Jianwang and Chen Jinping, were arrested earlier this morning at their homes in New York City. As alleged, the defendants worked together to establish an overseas police station in Manhattan's Chinatown on behalf of the Fuzhou branch of the Chinese government's National Police Force, the MPS. These defendants did China's bidding in secret while acting under the direction and control of an MPS official in China. Before helping to open the police station in early 2022, the defendant, Liu Jianwang, had a long-standing relationship of trust with PRC law enforcement, including the MPS. In 2018, Liu was enlisted in efforts to cause a purported Chinese fugitive to return to China. The victim of that effort reported that he was repeatedly harassed to return to China. That victim received threats of violence against his family in the United States, and MPS officers harassed the victim's family in China. Last October, FBI agents conducted a judicially authorized search of the secret police station and interviewed both Liu and Chun and seized their phones. In subsequent interviews with agents, Liu and Chun admitted that they had deleted communications with the MPS official from their phones after learning about the ongoing FBI investigation. As we allege, that is obstruction of justice. The defendant's actions under the direction of the Chinese government are flagrant violations of American sovereignty. And thanks to our investigation and arrest today with the FBI, the defendants will be held accountable, and the MPS is on notice that we will not tolerate similar threats to our national sovereignty. Before I close my remarks on this case, I want to deliver a message to anyone who needs to hear it. New York City is home to New York's finest, the NYPD. We don't need or want a secret police station in our great city. The second complaint I'm announcing charges 34 MPS officers who belong to a task force called the 912 Special Project Working Group. This task force isn't a normal police force. It doesn't protect people or combat crimes. It commits crimes, targeting Chinese democracy activists and dissidents located outside of the PRC, including right here in New York City. This task force operates as an internet troll farm, creating thousands of fake online personas, which they use in a coordinated plot to harass, disparage, and threaten dissidents and activists throughout the world. People who the PRC perceives as threats to the legitimacy of the Chinese Communist Party. One way that these MPS officers harassed Chinese dissidents was by repeatedly causing their meetings on U.S. technology platforms to be interfered with. For example, in an online video conference on the topic of countering communism, task force officers flooded the video conference and drowned out the meeting with loud music and vulgar screams and threats directed at Chinese dissidents. In crashing and disrupting these online meetings, the MPS subjected Chinese dissidents living here in the United States to the authoritarian rule of the PRC. That is unacceptable. And in addition to threatening and harassing Chinese dissidents, the MPS officers used their fake online personas to spread official Chinese government propaganda and narratives to counter and overwhelm the dissidents' pro-democracy speech. The MPS officers on the task force also used their fake online personas to spread disinformation. Among other items, the official PRC disinformation suggested the weakness of U.S. democracy and foreign policy, sought to sow political divisions in U.S. national elections, and conveyed conspiracy theories regarding the U.S. government's alleged responsibility for the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. As a result of our investigation, the world now has a unique, never-before-seen view of how the PRC government deployed this army of internet trolls. We cannot and will not tolerate the Chinese government's persecution of pro-democracy activists who have sought refuge in this country. And let this prosecution serve as a warning that we remain resolved and steadfast to fight against any efforts by the Chinese Communist Party to oppress and intimidate our residents. I'd like to take a moment just to praise the work of my office's National Security and Cybercrime Section, which has long been a national leader in successfully prosecuting counterintelligence threats with a focus on hostile foreign state actors such as the PRC and Russia. And I also want to acknowledge and thank my outstanding team, Assistant United States Attorneys Alexander Solomon, Nick Moscow, Ian Richardson, Jessica Weigel, and Antoinette Rangel, and litigation analysts Benjamin Richmond and Mary Claire McMahon. I also want to thank trial attorney Scott Claffey from the National Security Division and FBI agents Joseph Hugdahl, Amy Turner, Belinda Lee, Robbie Markham, Jason Moritz, Carrie Crossmore, Michael Joyner, Jillian Saladay, and John Ferraraccio for their truly exemplary work on these cases. Now, the allegations you just heard sort of pull back the curtain on the PRC's audacious and illegal attempts to harass dissidents and stifle free speech in our country. And today's charges send a crystal clear response to the PRC that we are on to you. We know what you're doing, and we will stop it from happening in the United States of America. And I want to emphasize this for the members of our Chinese diaspora community living in the Eastern District of New York and elsewhere in our country, those folks who are potential targets of PRC-directed harassment, intimidation, and spying. My office and our law enforcement partners are here to protect you and your rights, and no foreign country will stop us from doing that. I will now call up Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General David Newman of the National Security Division to explain the details of and answer any questions regarding the third criminal complaint from my office from which I am recused.
Thank you. I'm David Newman, the Principal Deputy Assistant Attorney General for National Security at the Department of Justice. Assistant Attorney General Matt Olson is attending to other matters in Washington today, could not be with us. I'd like to extend my thanks to U.S. Attorney Peace, to Assistant Director Driscoll, and Assistant Director Sundberg for welcoming me in his stead to address these cases. The trio of cases announced today details how the People's Republic of China, through its Ministry of Public Security, has engaged in a multi-front campaign to extend the reach and impacts of its authoritarian system into the United States and elsewhere around the world. It shows the PRC's efforts to globalize the oppressive tactics used domestically in China to silence dissent. Authoritarianism is a threat to democracy anywhere. The efforts of government of the PRC to export authoritarian methods to stifle free expression in the United States is a threat to America's democracy that we will not abide. Today's arrests and disruptions show that the Department of Justice is committed to using the rule of law to hold accountable authoritarian state actors who seek to threaten the integrity of American public discourse and the right to free expression that underpins our nation's values. And we are calling foul on conduct that should be out of bounds for any responsible nation-state actor. The NPS is seen as the Chinese government's principal national police authority, but the actual role of the NPS, as you just heard, is broader, extending to intelligence and national security operations far beyond China's borders, including the illicit transnational repression schemes that are the target of today's three actions. Across these cases, the multidimensional nature of the PRC's transnational repression playbook have played out in the charges we allege today. First, in the case you just heard, in the physical sense, the NPS established a concrete outpost, an off-books police station right here in New York City, to monitor and intimidate dissidents and other critics of the PRC within one of the United States' most vibrant diaspora communities. The complaint alleges that on behalf of the MPS, 2 New Yorkers opened and operated that so-called police station starting in February 2022. Next, in the virtual sense, the threat from the PRC manifested as its agents and operatives sought to interfere with online gatherings, online organizing, and other social media critiques of the PRC regime, going so far as to conspire with an employee of a US-based technology company to compromise the privacy of online virtual meetings, which were being used by attendees as a modern-day means of public protest and the exercise of freedom of assembly. This fact pattern, in the case I am announcing, underscores the insider threat risk facing any U.S. company that does business in China and has employees based in China. In the second complaint just unsealed, we have charged 34 defendants with conspiring to harass and threaten U.S.-based critics of the PRC regime. The 34 defendants are MPS officers who are members of the 912 Special Project Working Group. The group's officers post, monitor, and update content on various social media platforms that mirror and amplify the PRC-approved public messaging. Using false names, these fake accounts disseminate and amplify messages to manipulate public perception in favor of the PRC and to undermine and discredit perceived adversaries of the PRC, including the United States, as well as democracy generally. The MPS also uses these accounts to extend the PRC's reach, both online and off, in order to intimidate specific critics and dissidents. To that end, a third complaint unsealed today, the one I am announcing, amends and builds on prior complaints out of the Eastern District of New York and lays out how MPS officers targeted participants in virtual convenings hosted on the platform of a U.S. communications technology company. Participants included Chinese dissidents and critics of the regime based in the United States and around the world. As described in the amended complaint, the actions of the MPS officers had a chilling effect on meeting participants, some of whom had fled the PRC and knew the PRC was likely monitoring them from abroad. The complaint in that case also alleges that the MPS worked closely with another defendant to censor speech on the U.S. technology company's platform, including speech taking place here in the United States. As announced when the original complaint was filed in December 2020, that defendant was an employee of the U.S. technology company who was working at the time in China. We allege that the defendant removed content critical of the PRC, fabricated evidence of the terms of service violations in order to end virtual meetings critical of the PRC, and suspended and canceled user accounts that were critical of the PRC. Whether through these physical or virtual means, these crimes created real effects for victims in the United States, victims whose rights the Department of Justice is committed to protecting. As the National Security Division, my division, continues to pursue its strategy of countering nation-state threats, we want to emphasize that our efforts, including today's cases, are directed against the illicit actions of the PRC government and its agents, not the Chinese people, not the Chinese diaspora community in the United States, and not Americans of Chinese descent. In our work in this space, we have seen that victims of transnational repression in the United States are too often individuals who came to the United States precisely to benefit from the added protections that our Constitution and our laws provide against authoritarianism and tyranny. In the United States of America, the law protects all of us in the peaceful expression of our opinions, our beliefs, and our ideas. And in America, the law protects all of us equally from persecution, violence, and threats of violence. As authoritarian governments, whether the PRC, Russia, Iran, or others, become more brazen in their efforts to trample the rights and liberties that are the bedrock of our democracy, the Department of Justice will redouble its efforts to defend our democracy, our democratic institutions, and our sovereignty. I'll add my congratulations to the Federal Bureau of Investigation, to U.S. Attorney Peace's team in the Eastern District of New York, and our colleagues in the National Security Division for their unflagging and continuing efforts to defend democracy from nation-state threats, regardless of where they originate. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I am Mike Driscoll, Assistant Director in Charge for FBI's New York office. I want to thank U.S. Attorney Peace for having us here today, for Deputy Assistant Attorney General Newman for joining us, and for Assistant Director Sundberg for making the trip up from Washington. As you heard in the first complaint we've laid out today, a shameless scheme directed by the Chinese government's Ministry of Public Security, their National Police Service, was carried out by two individuals who we arrested this morning. As alleged in the complaint, they set up and ran an undeclared police station in downtown New York City. This is clearly a blatant violation of our national sovereignty, and it circumvents the judicial law and law enforcement cooperation that is standard around the world amongst law enforcement organizations. This case is a further example of the audacious activities that the government of China has carried out right here on American soil. Just last year, in this same district, we announced charges in another repression case, where individuals operating on the behest of the Chinese government targeted a U.S. congressional candidate, an American citizen and a military veteran who had protested the Chinese government's abuses at Tiananmen Square. And this was an attempt to disrupt his campaign. I want to be clear that the individuals arrested today were working at the direction of the Chinese government. Not only was the police station set up on the order of MPS officials, but members of the Chinese consulate in New York even paid a visit to it after it opened. It is our belief that the ultimate purpose of this illegal police station was not to protect and serve, but rather silence, harass, and threaten individuals here in the United States, and particularly those expressing views contrary to the Chinese government. The charged individuals used a New York-based nonprofit to set up the station, claiming their purpose was to serve the people of Chinese descent with things like driver's license renewals. But only a month after opening, their MPS contact directed them to hunt down a pro-democracy Chinese dissident living in California. Upon learning of the FBI's investigation into the police station, the defendants erased their communications to conceal their activities. The FBI is unwavering in our mission to protect the American people and uphold our Constitution and the freedoms enshrined in it. Anyone working on behalf of a hostile foreign nation to violate our national security and freedoms from within our borders will be held accountable. I want to urge anyone who's been targeted or approached by the Chinese government or by any other authoritarian regime to come to us for help. We want to hear from you. You can report this information to your local field office or reach out to us online at tips.fbi.gov. I want to thank those who helped make this case possible, our colleagues through the international intelligence and law enforcement communities who we always work closely with on these type of investigations, the Eastern District of New York, who clearly continues to be an outstanding partner on this issue, the New York City Police Department, which provided tremendous support, the members of our New York Field Office Counterintelligence Division, and in particular, I want to highlight the outstanding work by our case team, who are working so hard to bring this case. So thank you all for joining us today. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Director in Charge, David Sundberg from our Washington Field Office.
Thank you. I'd like to thank Assistant Director in Charge Mike Driscoll, U.S. Attorney Peace, and Deputy Assistant Attorney General Newman for this opportunity. My name is David Sundberg. I'm the Assistant Director in Charge of the Washington Field Office of the FBI. The charges you've heard about today reveal a series of brazen criminal schemes directed by the Ministry of Public Security. One of the complaints unsealed today shows that 34 MPS officials have been charged with conducting a massive campaign to use social media to harass and threaten Chinese dissidents, amplify division among Americans, and undermine confidence in our democratic processes. The officers worked with Beijing's MPS Bureau and were assigned to an elite task force called the 912 Special Project Working Group. The purpose of the group is to target Chinese dissidents located throughout the world, including in the United States. They attempted to use far-reaching campaign to spread their narratives touching many aspects of American life, and they tried to recruit others to unwittingly participate in this harassment by disseminating propaganda of the Chinese government. Additionally, 10 individuals, including 6 MPS officials, have been charged for their role in helping the Chinese government censor and silence free speech of users of a U.S.-based tech company's platform. The Chinese Communist Party was attempting to censor politically sensitive topics that are unacceptable to the PRC government, including the Tiananmen Square massacre. All of these cases share a lot in common, including Chinese officials working for and at the direction of the Chinese government and targeting people here on U.S. soil through threats, harassment, intimidation, and malign influence. The individuals charged today are operatives supporting the Chinese government's campaign to export repression and crush any criticism of its failings by trampling freedom of thought and expression, including here in the United States. Our partnerships are one of our greatest strengths, and we will continue to use those to bring these cases to light. So thank you to those partners who provided assistance to us, including our private sector partners and our colleagues throughout the international intelligence and law enforcement community, who are also battling the Chinese government's aggression. Additionally, I want to acknowledge all of the FBI employees, special agents, analysts, linguists, to name a few, all those who have played a part in these 2 Washington field office investigations and brought them to where they are today. At the FBI, we are focused on the actions of the Chinese Communist Party and its officers, not the Chinese people or those of Chinese descent. As these announcements demonstrate, Americans of Chinese descent are too often the victims of this aggression, and the FBI stands firmly with and for them. They do not face this threat alone. Transnational repression is illegal. The FBI will continue to investigate these aggressive threats from the CCP and stand up for the freedom of speech. Thank you.
Question? I have a question.
Pierre, sure.
Can you give us a sense beyond the 2 men charged with operating the police station on East Broadway, how many people would be working at the office immediately? And were they collaborating with others to harass people within the United States?
Our investigation is ongoing, so I cannot comment further on some of those issues. The complaint does note that there were co-conspirators involved, so we will continue to investigate this. Jonathan?
Thanks. On the police station matter, was it just the one victim in California, or were there multiple victims allegedly targeted? And secondly, on the broader issue of the social media intimidation, this command group using a database of data mining, were they literally sucking up phone numbers and emails and other information to target and find out exactly who's in this country?
So Jonathan, on the first question, as we note in the complaint, we have evidence relating to the attempt to locate one victim in California. The other thing is important to note that these defendants, in effect, deleted a bunch of information before FBI was able to access it. So our investigation is ongoing, but obviously they obstructed the investigation. So we have to continue to work to figure out the full extent of their activities here in the United States. With respect to the second question, I don't want to go beyond the complaint, but it's clear that this group was able to mine for information that would allow them to target people in the United States. Their focus was to deliver certain messaging that was decided upon by the Chinese National Police to do the things we described before, present disinformation, to sow discord, to challenge and undermine democracy. So this was an extensive operation, and I'm glad we were able to shed light on it.
I don't know if you're able to share how you came to suspect that this police station might be operating in Chinatown, and then I'm sure this will probably be chilling for folks who live in similar communities throughout New York City. Any indication if there may be other similar police stations operating in New York City or other parts of the country at this point?
I can't comment on that, and I can't get into our investigative techniques here. But again, great work by the FBI to uncover this, and we continue.
Regarding the police station matter, I mean, this was called the police station. Did they do any other things that one might traditionally associate with a police station? Were they out patrolling their community, doing sort of like looking for dissidents on the streets, like visiting businesses, or was this was it more operations like trying to find the guy in California?
Again, our investigation is continuing on this, and the fact that we didn't have access to certain information from the two defendants has posed an impediment for now, but we continue. So I think the full extent of the activity of the individuals involved with the police station is still under review and investigation.
Is there any connection between the individuals arrested today and the previous individuals arrested and charged by your office under others, somewhat similar transnational repression schemes out of China? And then secondly, I think you referenced that the police station closed. What exactly does that mean? What makes you confident that it's no longer operating?
So with respect to your first question, I think the broad connection obviously is the MPS is behind these activities in multiple cases that we have charged, as we have identified. And I think to the extent there are overlaps, they're laid out in the complaint. I'm sorry, remind me of your second question.
What exactly does it mean that it's closed?
Our understanding at this point is it's no longer operating. So that's what it means. One last question, sorry.
You mentioned that consular officials had visited that police station. Were they, in fact, did they know what was going on there, or you asked the State Department to estimate
Mike, did you make that? Mike, yeah.
Thanks, John. So again, it goes to the nature of what we're investigating. We'll be looking at who they were involved with, not just officially from the Chinese government, but who are they involved with in the community. It goes to the question earlier of if you do know anything about, if anybody in the public has had contact with these individuals, has had similar experiences or has experienced this kind of repression, we're asking everyone to reach out to the FBI because we want to know the full extent of what were they trying to do, who were they in contact with, what is the nature of their activity in New York, and frankly in any city around the country.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.